Hi guys. Tonight we travel far back in time to a world of flickering torches, icy breath, and voices echoing through stone churches. You find yourself stepping into the 12th century on a winter evening so cold that your eyelashes stiffen when you blink. The moon hangs pale over crooked timber roofs, and the smell of wood smoke clings to every thread of your cloak. The year is winding down, and Christmas, at least as people then understood it, is almost here. You can feel it in the air, the mix of reverence and revelry, hunger and hope, frost and candlelight. You probably would not survive this century for long, but tonight you are just passing through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you make your way toward the glow of a village church. Inside, the sound of chanting carries through thick wooden doors. Candles gutter against drafts, their light trembling across faces that look older than their years. You watch people cross themselves with fingers red from the cold. Some wear rough wool, some patched leather, a few the faint shimmer of silk, but everyone seems subdued, caught between awe and exhaustion. Outside, the world feels hushed. The marketplace has emptied, though the scent of roasted onions and damp hay still lingers. A dog curls beside a shuttered stall. A woman in a hooded cloak hurries past, carrying something wrapped in linen bread for the priest, perhaps, or the last of the season's apples. The days have been short, the nights long, and though Advent has not yet ended, the anticipation feels heavy, like breath held too long. In this world, light itself is precious. People save candle stubs, tallow dips, and wax trimmings all year for this week. Some make their own by melting animal fat in iron pots. It smells foul, but when the wick catches, it's magic, warmth, safety, a hint of holiness. Historians still argue whether villagers saw these small flames as pure devotion or just practical survival. Either way, you understand why they stare so long at each spark. It's the closest thing they have to daylight in the dark months. You walk on toward the manor house. Through the narrow windows, you see a feast already underway for the wealthy. Long trestle tables groan beneath trenchers of bread, salted meat, and pitchers of ale. A minstrel strums a lute near the fire, his breath clouding in the chill. Servants dart back and forth, their shadows long and quick. Laughter bursts out, sudden and unrestrained, while outside the poor huddle closer to the kitchen door, hoping for scraps. You catch a whiff of roasted goose, spiced with pepper and cloves so rare they might as well be gold. A monk once wrote that Christmas was the season when the hungry briefly ate, the drunkards briefly prayed, and everyone pretended the world was kind. You smile at the thought. Even here, amid the poverty and plague, people still carve moments of joy. A child peers through the window, eyes wide at the sight of the feast. Someone inside notices and tosses him a hunk of bread. The boy runs off grinning, his breath steaming in the night. Overhead, the stars look sharper than you remember, and the constellations seem closer. The cold clears everything, even thought. Somewhere, a bell tolls. Its echo carries across the frozen fields, signaling compline the final prayer of the day. In the distance, oxen stamp their hooves, and a farmer curses softly, trying to thaw a bucket of water. There is something oddly comforting about how everyone moves according to light and weather, not clocks. The rhythm of life is elemental. Sun up, work, sun down, prayer, food, sleep. It makes you wonder how modern time ever took hold at all. In the Middle Ages, people counted hours by candles burning down, by the chill of morning, by the pattern of church bells. You imagine how peaceful it must be to surrender to such rhythms, to let nature decide when you rise, when you rest, when you feast. And yet, beneath the calm, you sense anxiety. This is not just a holiday, but a hinge in the year. Winter could still kill. If the harvest had been bad, Christmas was both celebration and warning. Eat while you can. The coming months would test even the strongest. Some believed that ghosts roamed during these dark days, restless souls trapped between old year and new. To ward them off, people lit extra candles or chalked crosses above their doors. A quirky old custom, mentioned in a 13th century sermon, tells of leaving a crust of bread and a mug of ale out for wandering spirits. Not for generosity, but for protection. Better to feed the dead than offend them. You reach the churchyard again. The snow reflects the candlelight from the windows, turning everything faintly golden. A group of villagers gathers near the gate, talking in low voices. Someone mentions the great frost of last year, when the river froze solid and merchants sold wine from barrels on the ice. Someone else mutters that the frost was punishment for pride. Another laughs, saying God must have enjoyed the sight of bishops skating. The debate fades into the night, but you keep the image holy men slipping across frozen water, their robes flaring like sails. Inside the church, the priest finishes his sermon. He speaks of hope and penance, of a world redeemed by birth in a stable. You listen, though your thoughts wander to what that meant for real people. The labourers trudging home, the mothers praying for children's health, the travellers seeking shelter before the next snow. Christmas for them was not a pause in abundance, but a spark in hardship. That spark mattered all the more because the darkness was real. As you leave the village, the path glimmers faintly beneath the moon. Somewhere behind you, laughter rises again from the manor. Ahead, the road winds through quiet fields dusted with frost. You pull your cloak tighter, your breath misting in front of you. The night feels ancient, but alive, the kind of stillness that hums beneath the surface, promising change. You sense that this season, this fragile balance between hunger and hope, has held humanity together for centuries. And as the wind picks up, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, you realize the candles behind you are still burning, small flames against an endless winter. The village sleeps in deep December hush. You linger on the edge of the square, where frost glitters across the thatch like powdered silver. It is Advent, the quiet season before Christmas, a time meant for reflection, fasting, and prayer. You can feel that stillness in the air, broken only by the soft cough of a donkey in a nearby stable and the distant murmur of psalms from the church. During these 4 weeks, people pull back from feasting and noise. They eat simply, often just bread, onions, and weak ale. Some even skip meat entirely, waiting for the feast day when indulgence will be allowed again. The rich might manage a pious fast with almond milk and fresh fish delivered from rivers half a kingdom away, while the poor chew on barley crusts and whisper thanks for whatever warmth they can find. You think about how different patients must have felt in a world without abundance. Hunger is not symbolic here. It is real. Each day begins in darkness. The sun hesitates to rise, leaving people to fumble through the early hours by the orange pulse of hearth fires. Inside cottages, families whisper the same hope every morning, that the cold will break soon, that the light will return. Advent is, in its way, an act of endurance. You wait, you trust, you prepare. Somewhere nearby, a small boy is helping his mother hang sprigs of evergreen above the doorway. They tie them with scraps of red wool, the colour meant to keep misfortune away. Holly for everlasting life, ivy for resilience, rosemary for memory. The smell of the herbs cuts through the smoky air. Historians still debate whether these green decorations were remnants of older pagan solstice rites or simply borrowed symbols turned Christian by the passage of time. Whatever their origin, you can tell they matter. They are the only colour left in a season of grey. In the church, Advent candles are lit one by one each week. The light grows slowly, and people count its progress almost like a heartbeat. The first candle stands for hope, the second for peace, the third for joy, and the fourth for love. You notice how carefully they protect each flame from drafts, cupping their hands around it as if shielding something fragile and precious. When the final candle joins the rest, the whole altar glows with quiet anticipation. Fasting during Advent does not mean sadness, though. There are markets to prepare for, fabric to mend, and gossip to exchange. At the monastery nearby, monks copy psalters by hand, the rhythmic scratch of quills echoing through cold stone halls. In town, women trade eggs for salt, wool for beeswax, each bargain sealed with a nod rather than coin. The world hums softly with activity, the calm before the feast. A peculiar custom survives in this period, the hanging of apples from branches brought indoors, polished until they shine like rubies. You watch a group of children in a cottage twist threads around the fruit, giggling as they balance each apple from a wooden beam. To them, the bright spheres are decorations. To their parents, they are symbols of the paradise lost and hoped for again. Some scholars say this was the ancestor of the Christmas tree, centuries before the first furs were brought inside German homes. It is hard not to smile at that thought, how something so small could begin a tradition that would one day fill the modern world. As the third Sunday of Advent arrives, the mood shifts slightly. People call it Gaudete Sunday, meaning rejoice. The priest's robes change from violet to rose, signaling a brief relief from the somnus. Bells ring longer, and even the poorest families allow themselves a taste of meat or a sip of wine. You can almost hear the sigh of relief ripple through the village. It is still winter, still hunger season, but for a moment, life feels generous again. You wander into the monastery's courtyard and watch as the brothers arrange a crude wreath of pine branches. Their fingers are raw from the cold, yet they move with devotion. One monk hums a hymn under his breath, something haunting and slow. The notes rise and fall like breathing. He notices you watching and nods, inviting you to listen. You wait in darkness, he murmurs, but the light always returns. The words settle in your mind, part prayer, part observation. Outside the monastery walls, the common folk have their own ways of passing these long weeks. Some tell ghost stories beside the hearth, believing that laughter keeps away restless spirits. Others mark each evening with a small ritual, a cup of ale poured to the floor for luck, or a prayer whispered to protect the livestock from wolves. A curious superstition persists that if you sweep your floor after sundown during Advent, you sweep out your household's fortune. You decide it's safer to let the dust rest until morning. In wealthier towns, bakers begin early preparations for the coming feast. You peek inside one narrow shop where a man is kneading dough flecked with spices brought from Venice: cinnamon, nutmeg, maybe a hint of clove. The smell is dizzying, almost sinful after weeks of restraint. His apprentice catches you looking and grins, holding up a tray of pastries shaped like stars. "Not yet," the baker warns him. "These are for Christ's birth, not before." He slaps the boy's wrist lightly, but there is warmth in the gesture. Waiting, it seems, makes everything taste better. In every home, there is talk of preparations. Who has enough ale brewed? Who still owes a goose to the Lord's table? Who can sing well enough for the church service? The air feels thick with expectancy, as if the entire world is taking one long, collective breath. You sense that even those who struggle, the widows, the serfs, the weary travelers, find some comfort in this ritual of waiting. It gives shape to hardship. It promises that light, warmth, and community will come again. A travelling friar preaches in the square, warning of sin and pride, his voice echoing off timbered walls. Yet between the words of warning, he smiles. "Remember," he says, "we fast so that joy may be sweeter. We wait so that hope may grow stronger." You feel the message settle into the crowd like a blessing. Some cross themselves, others just nod and turn away to their daily chores. As twilight deepens, the sky blushes pale rose before fading to indigo. The first stars appear, sharp and cold. A single candle burns in every cottage window, a tradition meant to guide the Christ child to their homes, or perhaps just to keep the dark from swallowing the village whole. You pause to look back one last time. The lights seem to breathe together, flickering in rhythm, and you realize that even in an age without electric glow or city noise, humanity has always sought the same comfort, a promise that night never truly wins. The morning after the third Sunday of Advent breaks slow and grey. A pale light seeps over the rooftops as you walk toward the heart of the village. The air smells faintly of smoke and damp straw, and a low fog wraps itself around the market square like wool. You can already hear voices, traders, children, and a few cheerful drunks who started early. It is market day, the closest thing this medieval town has to a festival before Christmas, and everyone, rich or poor, wants to take part. According to the few surviving records from this region, December markets were not only about commerce but survival. Winter supplies ran low, and people came to trade what little they had left. You watch as a farmer unloads a cart filled with turnips and dried peas, while another man offers candles made of tallow, so thick they look like wax sculptures. The smell is unpleasant, yet comforting, a mix of life continuing despite hardship. The merchant's shouts cut through the morning air. "Fresh wool, fine wool!" one cries, though the cloth is coarse and fraying at the edges. Another sells spiced wine, watered down until it barely tastes of grapes. You laugh quietly at the audacity. Even in the Middle Ages, marketing was an art form. A troupe of musicians begins to play near the fountain, their pipe and drum echoing off stone walls. Children gather, wide-eyed, as a juggler tosses apples into the misty air. There is one curious custom mentioned by travellers of the time. During the winter fair, some vendors sold roasted chestnuts wrapped in pages torn from old prayer books. The parchment burned easily, and buyers used the tiny scraps as kindling for their hearths. It was both blasphemous and practical, which perfectly summed up the medieval sense of humour. You imagine how scandalized a priest might look if he saw his sermons warming peasants' hands. In the midst of all this noise, a local tax collector strolls by, his pouch heavy with coins. The crowd parts for him, half in fear, half in mock respect. You catch fragments of whispered curses as he passes. A woman spits on the ground behind him for luck. The moment he disappears, a group of boys mimics his pompous stride, sending laughter rippling through the market. It is a small rebellion, but a satisfying one. At a nearby stall, a baker sells round loaves stamped with small crosses on top. Each loaf costs more than a day's wage, yet people buy them as offerings for the upcoming feast. "For the church," the baker explains with a wink, though you suspect half of them will end up on his own table. Not far away, a potter demonstrates how he shapes clay mugs with frozen fingers. You notice his apron stiff with old mud and hear the rhythmic hum he mutters to keep his hands moving. He tells a customer that he once made a cup so large a bishop drank ale from it at Christmas and promptly fell asleep under the table. No one knows if it is true, but everyone laughs anyway. The market is also a stage for gossip. You overhear talk of a new law forbidding peasants to hunt deer in the Lord's forest, of a traveller claiming to have seen the bones of the three wise men in Cologne, of a pig that supposedly speaks Latin when drunk on cider. You blink. The storyteller insists it happened, though he refuses to repeat the demonstration. Some truths, you decide, are best left mysterious. A curious traveller's diary from the late 12th century describes these fairs as half holy, half wicked. The author noted that the same hands that clasped in prayer at dawn would later toss dice by candlelight. Watching the crowd, you see what he meant. A friar blesses a beggar while 2 stalls away, a man sells love charms carved from bone. Both draw eager customers. One particularly strange attraction catches your eye. A booth draped with faded cloth claims to house a live merman, caught from the northern sea. You lean closer, half expecting to see a preserved fish or a carved hoax, but the merchant's pitch is good. He charges a penny to peek through a slit in the curtain. Those who emerge look disappointed yet entertained. You decide your penny can stay in your pocket. It is easy to see that trickery has always been part of entertainment. Scholars today remain uncertain about how much moral leniency local priests allowed during these winter markets. Some suggest the clergy tolerated a little chaos, seeing it as a harmless release before the sacred holiday. Others believe they quietly despised the fairs but knew that forbidding them would cause unrest. Either way, the church bell rings across the square, calling people back to order. The music fades, dice vanish into sleeves, and traders bow their heads as the priest passes by in his heavy cloak. The balance between sin and sanctity is delicate but well practiced here. By midday, the fog begins to lift. The sun, weak but golden, spreads across the square, turning icicles into slow drips of light. A woman sings as she sells ribbons dyed with crushed berries. Children follow her voice, their laughter bright against the grey stone. You can almost feel warmth returning, even if just for a moment. As you wander to the edge of the market, a young man offers to sell you a holy thorn, said to be from the crown of Christ himself. The relic looks suspiciously like a rose stem, but his sales pitch is flawless. Touch it, and your soul will shine brighter than any candle, he says. You thank him politely and move on. It occurs to you that faith and commerce have always danced closely together, each pretending to lead. By evening, the market winds down. Stalls are packed, coins counted, and leftover pies wrapped in cloth. The air smells of wax, mud, and laughter. A few stragglers linger, sipping the last of their ale, trading tales of miracles and mischief. You feel the same quiet contentment that must have filled countless others through the centuries, a sense that life, though hard, was still full of moments worth savouring. As you leave the square, the snow begins again, slow and gentle. The tracks of carts fade quickly, and the night wraps everything in soft silence. You look back one last time at the market lights, now flickering in the wind, and think of how those same fairs once shaped entire communities, part survival, part celebration, part illusion. The sound of distant bells calls you onward, a reminder that even amid laughter and deceit, devotion still waits at the edge of every winter night. Evening settles again, and you find yourself standing near the church, where a group of townsfolk gathers in the chill. The air carries the scent of damp stone and candle wax, and from within the building drifts the faint sound of chanting. Tonight, the villagers will witness something extraordinary for their time. A nativity play performed not by professional actors, but by neighbours, apprentices, and even the priest's helper who can barely remember his lines. According to old parish records that survived in fragments, these plays began as simple readings in Latin, meant to help people visualize the story of Christ's birth. Over time, though, imagination took over. The readings grew into full performances with costumes, songs, and sometimes unplanned comedy. You take your place among the crowd, stamping your feet to stay warm, as the first figure steps out into the torchlight. It is the angel Gabriel, wings stitched from linen and goose feathers. The crowd gasps, half in awe, half in amusement. Behind the angel comes Mary, her blue robe borrowed from the church altar cloth, and Joseph, a local farmer chosen for his beard rather than his piety. The baby Jesus is a loaf of bread wrapped in linen, yet somehow, despite the humble props, the moment feels sincere. You can almost sense the collective yearning for something pure and miraculous. A curious tradition of the time allowed villagers to add their own scenes to these sacred dramas. One chronicler noted that a few plays included shepherds who cracked jokes about taxes or ale, or devils who taunted sinners with voices suspiciously like local officials. The audience roared with laughter, and even the priest turned a blind eye. In a world where daily life was rigid and stratified, these few hours of shared humour felt almost sacred in their own right. As the play continues, you hear the soft bleating of real sheep brought in to add authenticity. The animals seem unimpressed, munching hay near the manger, while a group of children tries to mimic angelic singing. The melodies drift through the cold air, sweet but uneven. You smile, realizing that imperfection has its own beauty. Medieval accounts often mention that these songs were sometimes the first melodies villagers ever learned, passed down long after the words were forgotten. The performance shifts from solemn to chaotic when the three kings arrive, wearing crowns cut from gilded parchment. One of them trips over his robe and drops a gift of myrrh, which shatters with a puff of resinous smoke. The crowd cheers anyway. Someone nearby whispers that last year's play featured a real donkey that escaped mid-scene and ran through the alehouse. The memory still makes the onlookers grin. Experts today still debate how these religious plays balanced reverence and entertainment. Some argue that they were deliberate tools of education, designed to teach illiterate audiences the stories of Scripture. Others suggest they were more about community, an excuse to gather and laugh in the cold months. Whatever their origin, the impact is clear. The boundary between the sacred and the playful was softer than we often imagine. After the performance, a monk steps forward to offer a blessing. His breath clouds in the frigid air as he speaks of joy, humility, and the gift of light in darkness. When he finishes, the crowd disperses slowly, reluctant to leave the warmth of shared laughter. You notice how neighbors who rarely speak in daily life now exchange smiles and scraps of food. The play has done its work. It has made strangers into witnesses and witnesses into companions. You wander behind the church where the performers are still talking excitedly. Mary is shivering but radiant. The baker's apprentice who played an angel is humming to himself, and the farmer playing Joseph is laughing about how his staff nearly knocked over the altar. A woman hands out mugs of hot cider, its steam mingling with the night air. You take a sip. It tastes faintly of apples and smoke. A chronicler from the 13th century once described such evenings as a glimpse of heaven in the snow. He wrote that these little spectacles, rough and imperfect, allowed people to taste transcendence amid the mud and frost of ordinary life. You can feel that truth settling into your bones now, as the laughter fades and the last candle is extinguished. Later, as you walk back toward the darkened houses, you can still hear snatches of the songs echoing faintly between the buildings. A dog barks, a door creaks, and the stars seem to shimmer in rhythm with the memory of that fragile music. It is remarkable to think how such a simple tradition survived across centuries, evolving into the carols and performances that would one day fill grand cathedrals. A stray thought crosses your mind. Perhaps the people of this age were not so different from us. They sought wonder in stories, comfort in shared voices, and meaning in ritual. They wanted to see themselves reflected in something greater. As snow begins to fall again, light and fine, you realize that this desire to tell stories of hope on cold nights has never faded. You pause at the edge of the village, looking back at the church now wrapped in darkness. Somewhere inside, the priest is likely gathering candles. The children are being scolded for noise, and the old angel wings are folded carefully for next year. You can almost hear a faint echo of the choir, a ghost of sound lingering in the frozen air. The wind sighs softly through the bare trees as you turn away. The play is over, yet its warmth lingers in the heart of the night. The people will carry that warmth home with them, tucked beside the small embers of their hearths. And you carry it too, a reminder that in the depth of winter, imagination was one of the few things that never froze. Morning creeps through the shutters with a faint glow. You stretch and step out into the crisp air, drawn by the smell of roasting meat wafting from the manor kitchen. Today is the day of the feast, when both rich and poor celebrate the coming of Christmas in their own ways. The sound of preparation fills the air, clanging pots, bleating animals, laughter, and somewhere, the rhythmic pounding of dough. According to records kept by medieval stewards, a noble household might serve a dozen courses or more. The tables groaned beneath platters of roasted boar, venison, swan, or goose, each dish coated in glittering spices. The most extravagant hosts gilded their birds with edible gold leaf, or filled pies with live songbirds that burst out when the crust was cut. It was not only a meal, but a display of wealth and generosity. You can almost see the cooks moving like a small army, their hands red from heat, their aprons stiff with flour and grease. Inside the great hall, the walls are hung with evergreen boughs, their scent mingling with wood smoke and wine. The lord of the manor sits at the high table beneath a tapestry showing the nativity, while guests fill the benches below. The first course arrives on a silver platter, spiced pottage steaming like a potion, followed by roasted meats arranged in careful patterns. Servants pour red wine into goblets, and a minstrel tunes his harp in the corner, his fingers trembling in the chill. At the far end of the hall, the servants themselves eat quickly and quietly. Their food is humbler, bread, beans, and thin broth, but even they share in the mood of celebration. A clerk once noted that on Christmas Day, even the lowest in the household were given double portions, for charity was considered a duty as much as a virtue. Outside, in the village, the picture is different. You walk past small cottages where families gather around smoky hearths. They eat stews thickened with barley and flavoured with whatever meat they could save from the Lord's generosity. The smell of onions and herbs fills the air, and someone is singing softly near the fire. In a way, their joy feels purer, born from simplicity rather than display. There is a peculiar note in one medieval cookbook describing a recipe called mock peacock. The cook was instructed to roast an ordinary chicken, then sew on the plucked and dyed feathers of a peacock to make it appear grander. Guests, of course, were expected to pretend not to notice. You cannot help but smile at the cleverness, realizing that even in an age of faith, vanity found its place at the table. The Lord raises his cup, offering a toast to his guests and servants alike. The hall erupts in cheers, and the minstrels strike up a lively tune. You notice how quickly solemnity gives way to mirth, how prayers dissolve into song. The children dart between benches, laughing, while the dogs fight over bones underfoot. The sound is messy, alive, deeply human. Some historians believe these great feasts had a hidden purpose beyond celebration. They reinforced loyalty. By feeding everyone from knights to kitchen boys, the Lord demonstrated his power and benevolence. In return, his people offered gratitude and service. It was a social contract, written not in ink, but in bread, ale, and meat. Others suggest the generosity was more genuine, a rare chance for community to dissolve the usual boundaries. You suspect the truth lay somewhere in between. A jester in bright motley bursts into the hall, juggling oranges that have travelled from Spain by ship and mule. The guests clap and shout with delight. The fruit is a marvel, worth more than silver, glowing like small suns in the candlelight. The jester slips one to a servant when no one is looking, a tiny act of rebellion disguised as kindness. You catch the exchange and grin. By the hearth, the cook wipes sweat from his brow and sighs. He mutters to another that he has not seen the sky since dawn, and that next year he plans to roast the Lord himself for supper. His friend laughs so hard he spills his wine. Humour, it seems, is the best seasoning. As evening falls, the hall grows loud with music. Someone brings out a recorder, another beats a drum, and voices join in song. The melody is rough but full of life. The refrain celebrates the Virgin and the newborn child. Yet between the lines you hear something more earthy, a gratitude for warmth, for ale, for the simple fact of surviving another winter. In a corner, the steward counts the loaves and sighs. He will have to record every item spent, every jug of wine emptied, every candle burned. For him, Christmas means arithmetic and exhaustion. Still, he smiles as he writes. Later generations will thank him for the details that now let you imagine this scene. A faint chill seeps back into the hall as the fires burn low. The Lord stands, blessing his guests and offering a final prayer. The crowd falls quiet, the laughter softening to murmurs. You can almost feel the weight of tradition pressing through centuries, food, fellowship, and faith intertwined in one fragile balance. Outside, the stars glitter coldly over the frosted fields. The laughter drifts out into the night, fading into the stillness. You take a deep breath, catching the scent of roast goose and pine smoke still hanging in the air. It strikes you how universal this desire to share food in the dark months has always been. In this world of candlelight and hunger, celebration becomes an act of defiance, a declaration that life endures even when the frost deepens. You turn away from the manor, your footsteps crunching softly on the frozen path. Behind you, the feast continues, voices rising in song again. You cannot help but think that somewhere, even now, another hall is filled with the same warmth, another table heavy with food, another group of strangers finding joy in a single golden night. You wake to the sound of bells echoing across the frosted fields. The first day of the 12 days of Christmas has begun, and the air feels charged with a strange mixture of piety and mischief. Frost crystals glint on every branch, and the smell of smoke lingers from the previous night's feast. You rub your hands together and begin your walk through the awakening village. According to records from the period, the Christmas season in the Middle Ages did not end with a single day of celebration. Instead, it stretched across nearly 2 weeks of prayer, feasting, and wild festivity. From Christmas Day to Twelfth Night, life slipped into a state of suspended order. The hard rules of daily work loosened, the poor were fed, and the weary could finally laugh without fear of reproach. For a short time, the world turned upside down. The morning service fills the church with a smoky haze of incense and candle wax. Villagers pack into pews, their breath steaming in the cold air. The priest's voice rises and falls, the Latin words familiar even to those who cannot read. You notice children fidgeting, stifling giggles, while mothers try to hush them. Behind the solemn prayers, there is a pulse of excitement. Everyone knows that after the Mass, the festivities begin. Once the service ends, the church doors burst open, and laughter spills into the square. Men carry flasks of ale, women hold baskets of bread and cheese, musicians tune fiddles and pipes. The snow crunches underfoot as people begin to sing. The melody is rough yet joyful, carried more by rhythm than harmony. It is said that carols of this time often mix the sacred with the playful, praising the Virgin one moment and teasing the local miller the next. One particularly colourful practice mentioned by medieval chroniclers was the game of wassailing. Groups of villagers would go door to door carrying a wooden bowl of hot spiced ale, offering it to their neighbours while singing blessings for health and good harvest. In return, they expected coins, cakes, or more ale. You watch as a group of young men, cheeks flushed with drink, perform this ritual outside a cottage. The host laughs and empties a jug into their bowl, and they cheer before stumbling away to the next door. It is half prayer, half party, entirely alive. At the manor, the celebrations are grander. The Lord hosts another feast, this one more relaxed than the solemn Christmas dinner. The hall glows with light, and a boar's head decorated with rosemary and apples is carried in on a silver platter. According to accounts from royal households, the presentation of this dish was a spectacle, often accompanied by song. You hear the first notes rising now, a steady chant honouring the boar's head carol. The sound fills the air with an odd majesty, reverent and ridiculous all at once. There is a curious anecdote from a 15th century letter describing how a servant once tripped while carrying the boar's head, sending it rolling across the floor. The guests gasped, the dogs pounced, and the entire feast dissolved into chaos. The letter ends simply, "It was the best merriment of the night." You can almost picture it, laughter echoing through the smoke. Outside, the peasants' version of celebration continues around bonfires. People dance in circles, stamping their feet to keep warm, their shadows stretching long across the snow. You watch a group of women toss dried herbs into the flames, murmuring old blessings to drive away sickness and ill luck. Whether these charms are remnants of pagan belief or simply folk wisdom, no one cares. The night belongs to whoever dares to celebrate it. Some scholars think the 12 days offered more than rest. They were a ritual reset of the social order. For a brief time, roles blurred. Lords dined beside tenants, priests drank with their flock, and laughter replaced fear. One medieval preacher wrote that these days were a holy madness permitted by God. Yet not everyone approved. Conservative monks complained that too much joy invited sin, that men forgot their place. Perhaps that was the point. You wander between fires as the evening deepens. A fiddler plays a tune sharp and bright enough to cut through the cold. A young girl twirls, her dress spinning in the torchlight, her laughter rising like birdsong. An old man sits nearby, tapping a rhythm on a wooden mug. He catches your eye and grins. For once, he says, nobody tells me to hush. His voice cracks with age, but his joy feels ageless. In one corner of the square, a group of children is building a snow figure shaped like an angel. Someone crowns it with a wreath of ivy, and they all cheer. The snow glows gold in the firelight, and for a moment the whole village seems suspended in that glow. Faces flushed, hands linked, hearts lightened. As the night stretches on, ale flows freely, and the singing grows louder. The air hums with stories and laughter, and though you know the days ahead will return to hardship, for now the world feels generous. The 12 days have begun, a liminal space between years, a time when even the poorest can feel the weight of joy. The wind picks up, swirling sparks from the fire into the darkness. You pull your cloak tighter and take one last look at the glowing faces, the wild music, the trembling stars overhead. It strikes you that the Middle Ages, for all their brutality, understood something we have almost forgotten, that celebration is not denial of suffering but defiance of it. In the frozen silence of midwinter, humanity invented warmth from nothing but song, light, and shared breath. You walk away slowly, the bells still echoing behind you. The night feels softer now, less like an ending and more like a promise whispered through the cold. Tomorrow will bring another feast, another song, another fragile victory over the darkness. The next morning rises pale and muffled, as if the world itself is still drowsy from last night's revelry. You wake to the faint echo of distant singing, carried on the cold wind like the memory of a dream. The sound grows clearer as you step outside, boots crunching on the hard frost. It is a group of carolers, their breath forming little clouds as they move from cottage to cottage, filling the air with music that feels both holy and joyful. Contemporary accounts from the 15th century describe how music filled every corner of the Christmas season. People sang in churches, in taverns, even in frozen fields. The word carol originally meant a dance in a ring, not just a song. You imagine the scene as it once was, villagers clasping hands, spinning in circles to the rhythm of pipe and drum, voices rising against the chill, until the stars themselves seem to listen. In the church, more formal melodies echo through the stone vaults, the choir chants in Latin, their harmonies weaving together like candlelight reflected on polished brass. The notes are slow and solemn, yet deeply comforting. One chronicler noted that monks practiced their Christmas hymns for weeks, even during fasting, their voices cracking in the cold but their resolve unshaken. You stand at the back of the nave, the sound washing over you like warm water, and feel the strange peace that comes when music replaces thought. Outside the abbey walls, however, the tone shifts. You hear a rougher, earthier tune drifting from the tavern. A man with a fiddle and a missing tooth plays a lively rhythm while others clap in time. The words of the song are half religious, half ridiculous, praising the Christ child while complaining about the price of ale. It is this mixture, sacred and bawdy, that defines the music of the season. A parish record from Norfolk once scolded villagers for dancing too merrily before the manger, proof that joy and sin were often separated by a single note. A curious detail found in old manuscripts tells of a bagpiper who played every Christmas Eve in the courtyard of a monastery, his droning tune meant to drive away evil spirits. The monks tolerated him for years until one winter his bag burst mid-song, startling the abbot so badly he dropped a candle into a barrel of oil. The resulting fire damaged half the cloister. The piper fled and was never seen again, but the story survived as a warning. Not all music brings harmony. Still, you can see how sound carries comfort. In a world without clocks or radio, music was a way to mark time, to hold memory, to make joy tangible. A woman hums as she kneads dough. A shepherd whistles to his flock. A tired soldier sings to remind himself he is still alive. Each note is a kind of defiance, a claim that life deserves melody even in the coldest season. Later that afternoon, the Lord's musicians arrive at the village square. Their instruments gleam in the faint sunlight, shawms, lutes, drums, and something like a small harp. They begin to play a carol that floats between reverence and laughter, a rhythm both stately and wild. Children gather instantly, clapping along, their mittens slapping together like soft percussion. Even the priest allows himself a faint smile, tapping his foot under his robe. According to a letter from a French courtier, nobles often competed to compose the finest carol for their Christmas feasts. Some were tender lullabies for the Virgin, others were political flattery disguised as song. Music carried power, the way gold or prayer might. It shaped memory, softened cruelty, and bound people together when words failed. You feel that truth in your bones now as the melody wraps around the crowd like a woolen cloak. When the musicians pause to rest, a boy steps forward with a reed pipe of his own. He is no older than 12, his clothes ragged but his confidence fierce. He begins to play a simple tune that everyone recognizes, a carol known across villages and kingdoms alike. Slowly, voices join in. First a few, then dozens, until square vibrates with shared sound. You notice how even those who cannot carry a tune hum anyway, unwilling to be silent. Scholars today suggest that such moments of communal music were among the few times the social hierarchy dissolved. In song, a peasant's voice could rise beside a noble's and be heard as equal. Some researchers argue this unity was one reason church authorities tolerated the more rustic carols, despite their occasional mischief. Others believe the priests simply loved the sound too much to silence it. Whatever the reason, you can feel how these songs stitched people together. As dusk approaches, the last of the sunlight catches the snow and turns it to molten gold. The carolers make their way down the lane, singing as they go, their torches flickering in rhythm. The refrain drifts back to you long after they disappear, a promise of hope, of joy renewed each winter, of music surviving everything. You linger, listening to the echoes fade. The world feels still, yet not empty. Somewhere, a final note hangs in the air, trembling like a heartbeat. You realize that in this age of cold nights and long silence, music was not a luxury, it was survival itself. By the seventh morning of Christmas, the frost has thickened into glass across every window. The air feels sharp enough to bite, but laughter still floats through the lanes. You follow the sound to the square, where people are exchanging small tokens, little gifts meant to carry blessing rather than wealth. Contemporary accounts reveal that gift-giving in the Middle Ages was not confined to one day. Depending on the region, presents were offered on Christmas Day, New Year's, or the Feast of the Epiphany. What they gave depended on what they had. A lord might present his guests with embroidered gloves or silver cups. A craftsman might gift a wooden spoon carved with care. A farmer might give a neighbor a basket of apples or a loaf of honey bread. Each gift carried a message of goodwill and survival. You watch as a woman hands her daughter a small orange, its skin bright against the grey day. The child gasps as if she has been given the sun. Oranges, imported through tangled trade routes from Spain and Sicily, were rarities beyond imagining for most people. Their arrival at Christmas symbolized both luxury and miracle, proof that even in the dead of winter, sweetness could still appear. A curious document from a London guild lists the gifts exchanged between apprentices and masters: candles, ribbons, spiced cakes, and sometimes gloves scented with herbs to keep away illness. The ritual was both personal and symbolic, a small ceremony of loyalty and respect that bound communities together. You can imagine the apprentices laughing nervously, their hands cold as they offer these humble treasures, and the masters nodding in approval before sharing a cup of wine. One delightful oddity mentioned in a traveller's chronicle tells of peasants who believed that giving a loaf of bread baked with a single coin would bring luck to the household. Whoever found the coin was said to have God's favour for the year ahead. You picture the scene at a village table, laughter erupting as the coin clinks against a tooth, followed by jokes about the lucky one's sudden holiness. Yet generosity was not always without tension. Some historians note that giving could also serve as a form of social control. Lords distributed food or coins to show benevolence, but these gifts reminded the poor of their dependence. Others, however, see genuine kindness in these gestures, especially during years of famine or plague. As always, intention and necessity tangled together like vines around a post. The church, too, played its part in shaping these customs. On Street Stephen's Day, which followed Christmas, almsgiving was expected. The wealthy gave to the poor, and those who had little gave whatever they could spare. One monk recorded that charity is the true feast of Christmas, for the hungry man's belly praises God louder than any hymn. You walk past a doorway where a woman sets down a bowl of broth for a beggar. Steam curls into the cold air, and the man's whispered thanks sound like a prayer. In the manor, the exchange of gifts follows a strict hierarchy. The steward presents the lord with a fine cup, engraved with the family crest. The lord, in return, offers him a fur-lined cloak. At the table, servants receive small tokens, bits of coin, leftover candles, and sometimes a piece of fabric to make new clothing. A musician receives a silver clasp for his lute. Every gesture, however small, holds meaning. One curious account from a household ledger describes how a lord once gifted his wife a mirror framed in ivory. Such an object was rare and costly, but what fascinated chroniclers was the lady's response. She immediately gave it to a convent, saying vanity had no place in her prayers. Modern historians still debate whether her gesture was pure piety or a clever rebuke to her husband's extravagance. You suspect it was both. Down in the village, the mood is lighter. Children run from house to house showing off their trinkets. A ribbon, a bell, a ginger biscuit. A group of young men exchange carved wooden figures shaped like animals, a local tradition meant to ensure good luck in hunting. A few of the figures are comically exaggerated. A pig with wings, a rabbit with a crown, and the laughter they spark is genuine. The act of giving, in this world, feels more sacred than the gifts themselves. Every offering carries a whisper of gratitude for having survived another year. Even a crust of bread, shared between friends, becomes a promise that neither will face the winter alone. You realize that these customs, simple and sincere, hold the same warmth as any grand feast or sermon. As dusk falls, the streets glow with candlelight. Families gather indoors, trading blessings as the cold presses against the windows. You pass a cottage where a woman is tying a small cloth pouch to the ceiling beam. Inside it are herbs, dried fruit, and a silver coin. She murmurs a charm for protection, her voice low but steady. A visiting priest once wrote that such tokens were half superstition, half faith, yet even he admitted they carried comfort. You step back into the square, the sky deepening to indigo. The carolers have returned, singing softly now, their voices a gentle ribbon through the quiet. Around them, the people hold their small treasures, close tokens of love, hope, and endurance. You watch the flicker of candles against their faces and think that perhaps the true gift of Christmas was never gold or spices, but this, the shared light that refuses to die out, no matter how long the winter lasts. The following morning, the village square feels unusually alive. Laughter bursts from doorways, bells ring from the church, and somewhere a group of boys shout as they chase one another through the snow. You soon discover the reason. Today is the day of the Lord of Misrule. Every year during the 12 days of Christmas, one commoner is chosen to play king for a night. He is crowned in jest, given a robe of patchwork rags, and allowed to rule with nonsense and cheer. Chroniclers from the 15th century described this strange inversion of power with both amusement and alarm. The lord of misrule might order nobles to dance in the streets, command monks to sing bawdy songs, or decree that every cup must be drained before sunrise. The entire village joined the joke, pretending that the world had turned upside down. Some called it folly, others saw in it a necessary release, a way for ordinary people to laugh at those who usually held the whip. You find the chosen lord standing on a barrel, a wreath of ivy crooked on his head. His cheeks glow red from both drink and triumph. A group of musicians stand nearby, tuning their instruments, ready to turn every decree into song. The crowd cheers as the false king raises his hand. "Let the milkmaids judge the men, and let the hens eat before the cocks," he shouts, and the laughter that follows rolls like thunder. A curious account from a monastery in York tells of one year when the Lord of Misrule demanded the abbot himself lead a dance around the cloister. The abbot, torn between outrage and laughter, complied. The monks circled the courtyard singing a hymn that quickly turned into a drinking song. Later, the abbot wrote in his journal that God must have smiled, for the heavens did not fall. Not every priest was so tolerant. Some sermons from the late Middle Ages condemn this revelry as dangerous. They feared that mockery of order might breed rebellion, that laughter could loosen obedience. Yet others believed it served a deeper purpose. One friar wrote that by allowing people to play with chaos for a short while, the church reminded them of the value of harmony when order returned. You can see wisdom in that. Even a joke can carry balance. As the day unfolds, the village transforms into a carnival. Tables appear in the square, covered with pies, bread, and mugs of ale. Children wear masks made from painted paper. Women tie ribbons around their sleeves. Even the oldest men join in the dancing. Someone bangs a drum, another strikes a pot with a wooden spoon, and suddenly the air is thick with rhythm. You find yourself tapping your foot without realizing it. The Lord of Misrule parades through the crowd on a cart pulled by two donkeys. Behind him walks a mock court of nobles, peasants wearing crowns of straw and carrying wooden scepters. They stop at each house to issue ridiculous proclamations. At the blacksmith's door, they demand a tax of hot bread. At the miller's, they confiscate a jug of ale for the royal treasury. Everyone plays along, shouting blessings and insults in equal measure. According to one surviving letter from a noble household, even great estates indulged in similar chaos. Servants were allowed to play master, and masters pretended to obey. For one day, a kitchen boy might order a knight to polish boots, while the lady of the house might serve the cooks instead. The writer admitted that though the idea seemed foolish, it always ended with more laughter than trouble. Perhaps joy, like justice, needed its own festival. An amusing story recorded in a Welsh chronicle tells of a lord of misrule who commanded that every man kiss the first woman he saw after sundown. The order caused such confusion that the parish priest reportedly spent the next day hearing confessions for hours. The chronicler, dryly, noted that the line outside the chapel was long, but the faces were smiling. By twilight, the revelry reaches its peak. Torches flicker along the frozen street, casting shadows that dance like spirits. The mock king sits upon his makeshift throne, handing out crumbs of cake as royal favors. Musicians play faster and faster until the songs blur into laughter. The cold no longer seems to matter. Historians today still wonder how much of this festival was harmless fun and how much hinted at deeper unrest. Some argue that these role reversals allowed people to imagine a world without hierarchy, even for a moment. Others think it was merely a safety valve, a way to let people release frustration before returning to their duties. Whatever the case, the night glows with wild freedom, a moment when joy needs no permission. Eventually, the false king stands, swaying slightly, and raises his cup. "My reign ends at sunrise," he declares, his voice rough but proud. Until then, laughter is law. The crowd roars in approval. They cheer as he drinks, as he stumbles, as he bows deeply to his people. You realize that no true king ever ruled hearts as fully as this jester king does now. When dawn finally creeps over the fields, the fires burn low, and the villagers drift homeward, exhausted but happy. The Lord of Misrule removes his crown of ivy and places it gently on the barrel where he first stood. His smile fades into something softer, almost wistful. Then he laughs quietly to himself and walks away, just another man returning to ordinary life. You remain for a moment, listening to the faint echo of celebration fading into mourning. The world will return to order soon, with work, taxes, and obedience restored. But for one shimmering night, laughter ruled, and the memory of that freedom will last long after the frost melts. The dawn after the revels feels quieter, though the air still carries the scent of smoke and ale. You walk through the village as the sun struggles to rise above a horizon rimmed with snow. Beneath your boots, frost crackles like crushed glass. The night's laughter has faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of daily life returning. Yet as you pass each cottage, you notice something new. Faint trails of ash drawn across thresholds, candles still flickering in windows, and logs glowing in every hearth. It is the season of fire, a ritual older than memory. According to early chronicles, every household kept a Yule log burning through the 12 days of Christmas. The custom likely began centuries before Christianity reached these shores, a remnant of older winter solstice fires that honored the sun's return. The log was chosen carefully, often from the largest oak on a family's land, and blessed before being lit. It was said that if the flame burned bright and steady, the coming year would bring prosperity. If it sputtered or died too soon, misfortune lurked near. You stop at one doorway where a family tends their log. The father kneels beside the hearth, turning the wood with an iron hook, while his wife sprinkles salt onto the embers. The children watch wide-eyed, their faces glowing orange. When the sparks rise, they squeal in delight, believing each spark carries a wish skyward. A grandmother murmurs a charm, half prayer, half rhyme, asking that no evil spirit cross the threshold before the fire burned out. A curious entry in a 15th century household book mentions that the ashes from the Yule log were gathered and spread over fields to bless the crops. Some even kept a small piece of the log to start the next year's fire, believing it carried the spirit of continuity. The detail fascinates you, an ancient belief in connection, in the way flame could link one year to the next like a living thread. As the morning brightens, the church bell tolls. You step inside to find villagers gathered again, clutching small sprigs of holly. The priest speaks of Christ as the light of the world, his words echoing the symbolism of the fires burning at home. Yet outside the church, people add their own meanings. You overhear a man telling his son that a fire lit on Christmas Eve can keep witches from flying overhead. Another insists that embers left untended invite ghosts. Superstition blends with faith until the two are inseparable. Scholars today often discuss how these winter rituals straddled both worlds, sacred and pagan. Some believe the Church wisely adopted older customs to ease conversion, reshaping them into Christian forms. Others argue that the people themselves resisted erasure, weaving old beliefs into new symbols. Whichever side is right, what you witness feels deeply human, the need to hold on to what gives warmth, both physical and spiritual. As evening falls, the wind sharpens again. Smoke curls from chimneys, rising like thin grey ribbons into the sky. You stop outside a cottage where laughter drifts through the shutters. Inside, a group of neighbours has gathered, passing mugs of hot cider and telling stories beside the fire. One man insists that the Yule log crackled in the shape of a cross last year and that it brought his family luck. Another counters with a darker tale, warning that if you let the fire go out before 12th night, restless souls might slip in through the ashes. The stories overlap, shifting between hope and fear, belief and entertainment. A traveller's diary from the late Middle Ages records a curious superstition. If a spark from the Yule fire lands on your sleeve, It foretells marriage within the year. You watch as a young woman near the hearth giggles when a spark jumps onto her skirt, and her friends tease her mercilessly. Even superstition, you realize, can serve as an excuse for laughter. Later, the oldest man in the room pokes at the embers with his cane. His face is creased like parchment, his eyes reflecting the glow. He begins to speak in a low voice about the winter storms of his youth, about neighbors lost to cold and hunger, about nights when only the fire kept despair away. The room falls silent as he finishes with a whisper, "Keep it burning, and you'll never lose hope." The words hang in the smoky air like a blessing. You step back outside. The sky is a deep velvet blue, and the stars glint faintly through the haze. From every chimney, thin smoke rises, each column marking a home where warmth still holds against the cold. The snow crunches softly beneath your feet as you walk toward the edge of the village. In the distance, a larger fire burns near the crossroads. The communal Yule blaze. People gather around it, faces ruddy from the heat, their voices mingling in song. The melody is slow and strange, a mix of Latin and local dialect, invoking peace on earth and blessings for cattle and crops. You feel the pull of that ancient rhythm, the heartbeat of a people who refuse to let darkness win. As the flames climb higher, sparks rise like tiny suns, drifting into the night. You find yourself thinking about how many centuries this ritual has endured, carried from generation to generation by hands now long turned to dust. The fire is both memory and promise, a symbol of resilience more powerful than any sermon. You watch until your face grows warm and your back chills with the wind, and then you smile. The fire will last the night, as it always has. You turn away, leaving the glow behind you. The path home is quiet, lit only by starlight. Somewhere, a log cracks in a hearth, releasing a shower of sparks, and the air seems to whisper its oldest truth, that warmth shared is warmth multiplied. That light only means something because of the dark surrounding it. The morning after the great fires feels dim and smoky, the air thick with the scent of ash and wood. You walk along the frozen road, your breath visible in small bursts, until you hear a faint jingling of bells. Ahead, a small group of children is running through the snow, laughing and shouting something about St. Nicholas. Their joy is contagious, and you follow to see where they are going. According to surviving sermons and festival calendars, the feast of St. Nicholas was celebrated on December 6th, but his presence lingered throughout the Christmas season. He was the protector of children, sailors, and the poor, a figure of kindness in a harsh world. In many towns, boys dressed as the saint would parade through the streets collecting food or coins for the needy. Their robes were borrowed from the church, their beards made from tufts of wool. The role carried pride, though it was temporary. You soon see one of these little processions in progress. A boy with a crooked halo leads the way, followed by others carrying baskets. They stop at doors, reciting short verses of blessing in exchange for bread, nuts, or candles. Their laughter rings like chimes in the frosty air. At one doorway, a woman hands them a small pie, whispering a prayer as she closes the latch. For a moment, you glimpse both the innocence of faith and the practicality of charity intertwined. A record from a monastery in Flanders tells of a more mischievous side to these customs. On the night before the saint's day, some townsfolk claimed that St. Nicholas travelled unseen, accompanied by a shadowy figure who punished the wicked. In one account, he carried a staff tipped with silver, while his dark companion carried a sack of sticks. The good received fruit and sweets, the bad, a symbolic beating. The story feels strangely familiar, its echo carried forward into modern myths. A curious entry in a scholar's notebook from the 14th century describes how certain villages performed mock trials for misbehaving children. Parents would summon a costumed saint to scold them gently before blessing the house. It sounds almost theatrical, and perhaps that was the point. Fear and forgiveness danced side by side in these rituals, just as joy and solemnity did in the plays and feasts you have already seen. As the afternoon fades, the mood shifts. A group of men gathers in the tavern to share stories of the saints' miracles. One speaks of sailors saved from a storm after calling his name. Another swears that a neighbor's sick child recovered overnight after a candle was lit in his honor. You notice that even the most skeptical drinkers nod respectfully. Faith in St. Nicholas, it seems, is woven into the fabric of survival itself. Not all the figures roaming the winter nights are so benevolent. In the corner of the room, a grey-bearded man tells a darker tale. He speaks of the wild hunt, ghostly riders said to sweep across the sky during midwinter storms, snatching souls from the earth. Some believed they were led by the devil, others by lost pagan gods refusing to die. To protect themselves, villagers carved symbols on their doors or hung sprigs of rowan over the hearth. The storyteller's voice lowers to a whisper, and the children listening pull their blankets tighter. A chronicle from Saxony mentions that priests often warned against these tales, calling them foolish remnants of heathen belief. Yet the same priests blessed homes with holy water during the same season, perhaps not entirely convinced that the stories were harmless. Modern researchers still wonder whether the Church tolerated these legends as a way of absorbing older fears or simply could not extinguish them. Either way, they survived, reshaped into lessons about good and evil, generosity and greed. Outside, the night deepens, and the cold sharpens. You step out of the tavern and look up. The sky is alive with movement, wind chasing clouds across the moon, trees creaking under frost. You understand why people once believed unseen forces passed through nights like this. The world feels thinner somehow, the boundary between the living and the mysterious stretched like parchment. In the distance, bells ring again. A group of villagers walks by carrying lanterns, singing a hymn about saints and salvation. Their song rises into the darkness, both a plea and a shield. Behind them, children follow, carrying tiny bags of sweets they received earlier. The glow of their lanterns flickers against the snow, and you feel the warmth of their faith despite the cold pressing around you. A small boy runs past, holding a wooden carving of St. Nicholas painted in red. He stops, looks up at you, and grins. "He keeps us safe from bad dreams," he says before running off to join the others. You watch him disappear into the swirl of light and sound, realizing how much comfort a single story can bring to a fearful world. You walk slowly toward the edge of the village, the bells fading behind you. The air smells faintly of pine resin and wax, and the silence that follows feels almost holy. You think of all the figures that inhabit these winter nights, saints and spirits, angels and demons, and how each one speaks to the same need, to believe that goodness might triumph, even for a season. When you reach the top of the hill, you turn back. The village glows softly in the valley, each home a point of light. Somewhere among them, a candle burns for St. Nicholas, another for safety from shadows, and another simply for warmth. The stars above seem to answer, cold yet constant, like a promise that the light will always return. The next morning you rise before dawn, when the sky is still bruised with grey and the air feels heavy with mist. You leave the village behind and follow the sound of distant bells until the path narrows into a line of frost leading toward a monastery on the hill. Its stone walls glow faintly in the early light, and a thin ribbon of smoke curls upward from the kitchen chimney. The scent of wood fire mixes with the salt of the cold, clean air. Inside, monks are preparing for their Christmas observances, their movements slow and deliberate. According to letters preserved from various abbeys, monastic Christmases were a balance of discipline and joy. For weeks before the holy day, the brothers had fasted, eating little more than bread and broth. When Christmas finally came, they were permitted meat, wine, and song. The transformation was sudden and profound. A monk from Winchester once wrote that the sound of laughter in the refectory on Christmas morning was as strange and sweet as birds in snow. You can almost hear that laughter now as you approach the gate. A porter greets you quietly, his hood drawn up against the cold. Inside the courtyard, the world feels hushed. Snow lies thick over the cloisters, softening every step. The monks move like shadows between the arches, carrying buckets of water and baskets of herbs. One of them pauses to feed crumbs to a flock of sparrows gathered on the frozen fountain. Their tiny wings stir the silence. In the chapel, the candles still burn from the night's vigil. The smell of wax and pine needles fills the air. You find a place along the back wall as the brothers begin their morning chant. Their voices rise together, low and resonant, filling the stone hall with harmony. The Latin words ripple through the air, ancient syllables that seem to warm the very stone. Even if you cannot understand every phrase, you feel their meaning. Gratitude, humility, the fragile joy of light reborn in darkness. Historical records suggest that on Christmas Day, monasteries were permitted a degree of cheer rare in the rest of the year. Rules were relaxed. Silence was lifted for a few hours, and even the strictest abbots allowed music, stories, and spiced wine. Some abbeys, particularly in France, held small theatrical readings, retelling the Nativity or the lives of saints. Chronicler from Saint-Denis described one such evening where the youngest novice played the angel, his voice trembling but bright, while the elders applauded softly. You can imagine the warmth of that moment breaking through centuries of cold stone. The kitchen of the monastery is alive with movement. Brothers stir great pots of stew while others prepare flatbread baked in the embers. The fragrance of herbs fills the air, sage, thyme, and a hint of garlic. One cook hums a psalm under his breath as he works, and another teases him for singing off-key. You smile as you watch. It is a rare glimpse of joy that feels almost childlike. An amusing note survives in the journal of an abbot from Yorkshire who once wrote that God forgives a monk's full belly at Christmas, for he made laughter, and laughter feeds the soul. His words remind you that even within strict walls, humanity always found a way to slip through the cracks. After the meal, the monks gather in the refectory for readings. One brother stands to recite passages from St. Augustine, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. Another follows with a record of miracles said to have occurred that year: a field of wheat that grew despite frost, a sick child healed after receiving blessed water. A third monk reads aloud from his own chronicle, noting the births and deaths of their community. The others listen quietly, their faces soft in the candlelight. It is both a celebration and a memorial, joy threaded with remembrance. Later in the afternoon you walk through the cloister garden. The air is crisp, and the ground crunches beneath your boots. Frost clings to every branch, turning the bare herbs into lace. A single monk stands by the sundial, his hands clasped in prayer. When he opens his eyes, he smiles faintly. Christmas reminds us, he says, that even the smallest light belongs to eternity. His words settle into you like warmth. At Vespers, the monks gather once more. The sun has vanished, and the only light comes from torches along the walls. The chant begins softly, growing until it fills the entire chapel with a sound like wind through pines. You close your eyes. The rhythm of the voices, the flicker of the flames, the faint scent of incense, together they form a kind of quiet eternity. According to some modern researchers, monasteries were among the first places where written carols were preserved. The brothers who copied manuscripts by day often added their own verses in the margins, poems of devotion and wonder. Some were simple prayers, others lyrical descriptions of winter landscapes. The most beautiful, perhaps, are those that combine both. Snow falling like grace, the world hushed in waiting. You can almost see the ink glistening as it dries on the page. As the final prayer fades, the monks extinguish the candles one by one. Darkness gathers gently around you, and for a moment you understand why these places endured for so long. In a world filled with hunger, plague, and violence, they offer a kind of stillness that no sword could pierce. The monastery hums with quiet faith, not loud or proud, but steady as the beating of a heart. You step outside into the night. The moonlight paints the courtyard silver, and the snow glows faintly blue. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. You look back once at the great stone walls, their outlines softened by frost. Inside, the monks will sleep, their hearts lightened by song and food, their minds already turning toward the next day's prayers. You walk away through the silence, feeling as though you carry a fragment of their peace with you. Glowing faintly like an ember in the cold. The road leading away from the monastery stretches pale and narrow through the snow. You follow it downhill, the cold wind pushing at your back. It feels good to move again after the stillness of the cloister. The world beyond the walls is rougher, louder, alive with motion. Carts creak over frozen ruts, their wheels wrapped in cloth to keep them from splintering. A man drives a small wagon filled with hay, his beard stiff with frost. His wife walks beside him, wrapped in a shawl, leading a cow that looks nearly as tired as they do. According to records from travelers and merchants, winter journeys in the Middle Ages were perilous. Roads turned to ice, bridges collapsed, and daylight vanished far too early. Yet people still travelled, drawn by duty, trade, or the need to see family before the year ended. Some were pilgrims heading toward holy shrines. Others were messengers carrying letters sealed with wax and prayers for safety. You pass a group of such travellers now, their cloaks crusted with snow, their horses plodding slowly. They nod as they pass, too weary to speak. A chronicler from the 13th century once wrote that winter travel required the faith of a saint and the patience of an ox. His words prove true as you watch a merchant struggling to coax his mule across a frozen stream. The ice groans beneath the animal's hooves, and for a moment you hold your breath. Finally, with a loud crack and a shower of water, they make it to the other side. The merchant crosses himself and mutters a prayer of thanks. Not every traveller is so lucky. Along the roadside stands a small wayside shrine, a crude wooden cross crowned with a sprig of pine. Someone has placed a loaf of bread and a candle at its base, offerings for a man who died here last winter. Stories like his were common. Bandits prowled even in the snow, and hunger drove desperate men to cruelty. You find yourself listening for footsteps behind you, just in case. An old song recorded in a medieval manuscript tells of a woman who walked 5 days through blizzards to visit her sister for Christmas. On the last night, she lost her way and prayed for light. The next morning, a hunter found her footprints circling a single pine tree where she had frozen standing. In spring, the tree sprouted buds shaped like tiny crosses. People claimed it was a miracle. Whether true or not, the tale travelled faster than the wind. You stop at an inn along the road, a low timber building half buried in snow. The sign hanging above the door shows a painted stag, its colour faded by time. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke, wet wool and beer. Travellers crowd the benches, their boots steaming near the hearth. You find a seat beside a farmer with cracked hands, who tells you he is heading home for 12th night. "If the roads hold," he says, "I'll be in my own bed before the candles burn down." His tone is hopeful but not certain. The innkeeper, a round woman with a laugh as loud as her ladle, serves a stew thick with barley and onions. You eat slowly, savouring the warmth that spreads through your fingers and throat. Around you, the murmur of conversation rises and falls like the tide. Someone strums a lute softly, and a few join in a song about Saint Christopher, protector of travellers. The melody is rough but sincere, each verse a reminder that no one journeys alone. According to one manuscript of travellers' tales, inns like this were vital sanctuaries in winter. They provided warmth, food, and news. The same record notes that prices often doubled during the Christmas season, but few complained. The safety of a roof and a locked door was worth more than gold. You can see why. Outside, the wind howls like a living thing, rattling the shutters. Later that night, you step outside to look at the sky. The moon hangs low, huge and white, lighting the road like silver dust. You can see the faint glow of other fires far away, dots of warmth scattered across the dark landscape. Somewhere out there, families gather around hearths, singing and telling stories. For a moment, you feel both alone and connected, a traveller bound by the same winter that holds them all. A strange belief recorded in a 14th century diary said that travellers who slept under the stars during the 12 days could hear the voices of angels in the wind if they kept silent long enough. You try it now, listening. The only sound is the crackle of branches and the faint cry of an owl. Still, you imagine that if faith were a sound, it might be something like this, quiet, steady, cold, endless. By morning the roads are rough again. You help the farmer hitch his cart while the innkeeper hands out bread for the journey. A few travellers share flasks of wine, raising a toast to good luck before setting off in different directions. The wind cuts sharp, but their spirits remain high. You fall in step with them for a while, your footprints mingling in the snow. As the sun rises, the clouds turn soft pink, and smoke curls from distant cottages. The sight fills you with a quiet sense of belonging. These travellers are strangers, yet their struggle feels shared, their hope universal. The road stretches ahead like a thread between worlds, monastery and village, feast and hunger, home and exile. By midday, you reach a crossroads. The others turn toward their destinations, waving farewell. You watch them go until they vanish behind the trees, then continue alone, the crunch of snow beneath your feet marking time. The air smells faintly of pine and cold iron. Above you, the sky is vast and bright. For the first time in days, you notice the light returning, soft but certain. Winter is still fierce, but you sense the year beginning to shift. By the time you return to the village, the sky is turning the color of pewter, and smoke curls from every chimney. The journey has left your hands numb and your cloak stiff with frost. You push open a cottage door and step into a world of warmth and wood smoke. The air tastes of baked bread, tallow, and pine. Around the hearth, a family is gathered, a father mending a broken shoe, a mother sewing a patch on a sleeve, and two children crouched close to the fire, their faces lit gold by the flames. In the Middle Ages, the hearth was the center of life. Archaeologists and chroniclers alike describe it as the heart of the home, where people cooked, worked, talked, and prayed. It was both kitchen and living room, chapel and refuge. Every evening the family gathered there, not simply to keep warm, but to keep hope alive. You sit beside them now, feeling the rhythm of their small world, the crackle of wood, the scrape of a knife against leather, the hum of the mother's quiet tune. The father glances up and smiles. "Cold out, is it?" he asks, handing you a cup of ale that tastes faintly of apples. You nod, and he adds another log to the fire. Sparks leap upward, and for a moment the whole room glows. He explains that the wood was taken from the sacred Yule log kept from last year's fire, a tradition meant to ensure good fortune. The children stare into the flames as if waiting to see magic. A record from a 13th century household guide notes that families often told stories by the hearth during the 12 days. Some tales were biblical, others legends of saints or kings, but most were about everyday people. A farmer who outwitted a demon, a girl who found a gold coin in a loaf of bread, a ghost who returned to remind his wife to share her food with the poor. You can almost hear these voices layered one atop another, stories travelling from mouth to mouth like embers passed hand to hand. The mother, still sewing, begins to tell a story of her own. It is about a snowstorm so fierce that even the angels lost their way in the sky. One of them, she says, fell into a chimney and stayed with the family below, unseen, until the thaw. When spring came, their field yielded twice the usual harvest. The children listen wide-eyed, the father smiling quietly as though he has heard it 100 times, but never tires of it. At the edge of the room, a cat sleeps curled on a bench. Its fur rises and falls with the rhythm of the fire. You notice that the walls are hung with dried herbs, rosemary, sage, and lavender bundled with red thread. According to old folk practices, these were not only for cooking but for protection. Some believed they could keep sickness at bay or drive away evil dreams. A monk writing in the 14th century called such customs half prayer, half charm. Yet even he admitted they brought peace of mind. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. The father crosses himself and tosses a pinch of salt into the flames. "That keeps bad spirits from hearing our talk," he says, almost apologetically. You remember the older superstition that winter nights belonged to wandering souls, and that every home's fire was a shield. Perhaps faith and fear have always been companions. The conversation turns to more ordinary things: how the haystack held through the last storm, how the neighbour's cow has gone dry, how the parish priest slipped on the ice. The children laugh at that image, and the mother hushes them gently, though she smiles too. You realize that humour, like warmth, is another kind of survival. A curious note in a 15th century diary describes how families would sometimes hang small objects from the rafters as charms for the coming year: a horseshoe for luck, a clove of garlic for health, a ribbon for love. Looking around, you see the same here. Above the door hangs a tiny wreath of ivy tied with twine. Beneath it, the light from the fire flickers against the ceiling beams, turning the whole space into a soft dance of shadow and gold. Later, the mother rises to prepare supper. The meal is simple stew, bread, and a bit of cheese, but the smell fills the room with comfort. She ladles a bowl for you, and you eat slowly, feeling the day's cold melt from your bones. Outside, the snow continues to fall in silent flakes that catch the firelight each time the door opens. After supper, the father takes down a small wooden flute and begins to play a tune, slow and tender. The melody fills the room like the memory of a lullaby. The children lean against their mother's lap, half asleep. You close your eyes and let the sound carry you, imagining that this is what peace must have felt like in a hard age. Not the absence of hardship, but a moment's pause within it. Before you leave, the family insists you take a small token for good fortune, a piece of bread from their supper, wrapped in cloth. "Keep it with you on the road," the mother says. "It will remind you there's always a fire somewhere." Her words stay with you long after you step into the cold again. Outside, the wind has quieted, and the snow falls thick and slow. Through the window you see the family settling in for the night. The father rakes the embers, the mother whispers a prayer, and the children curl up together by the fire. The light flickers, and the house seems to breathe with them, a single warm heart in the frozen dark. As you walk away, your footprints vanish almost instantly beneath the snow. Behind you, the glow from the cottage fades to a faint amber spark. You think of all homes across the land, each with its own fire, its own laughter, its own small stories. The thought warms you more than the cloak around your shoulders. The next morning dawns clear and dazzling, the kind of winter day that looks beautiful, but freezes your breath mid-air. The snow glitters like powdered glass across the rooftops, and the air carries a scent of pine and distant smoke. You walk through the village as people begin to stir, each doorway framed with touches of green. Holly glows red against pale wood, ivy curls around beams, and bunches of herbs hang above lintels. It is time to decorate for the holy season, a ritual both joyful and solemn. According to surviving parish accounts, villagers began decking their homes in greenery around Christmas Eve and kept it in place until Twelfth Night. The practice had deep roots, older than the church itself. Early writers described how even before the faith spread across Europe, people filled their houses with evergreen branches during the darkest days of winter. They believed that plants which stayed alive through frost carried magic against death and despair. When the church arrived, it gave new meaning to the custom. The same branches now symbolized eternal life, a promise of resurrection hidden inside winter's silence. You watch as a group of children gathers ivy from the hedgerows, their mittens stained green from sap. They sing as they work, a simple rhyme that blesses the plants and warns the spirits to stay away. Nearby, A woman trims holly and ties it into wreaths with bits of red thread. She smiles as you pass, explaining that the prickly leaves remind her of Christ's crown and the berries of his blood. Her voice is matter of fact, but her hands move with care. A curious detail in a 13th century account notes that people avoided bringing holly indoors before Christmas Eve, believing it unlucky to do so too early. Others claimed that holly belonged to men and ivy to women, and that whoever's plant dominated the decorations would rule the household for the coming year. You can imagine the laughter this belief must have inspired, couples teasing each other while pretending to hang garlands innocently. At the church, preparations are more elaborate. You step inside to find the pews lined with branches of yew and fir. The scent is sharp and clean, cutting through the lingering smoke of candles. Two altar boys stand on ladders hanging cloth banners embroidered with gold thread. The priest oversees the work with a mixture of reverence and pride. He tells you that every green leaf is a prayer in living form, a reminder that creation itself praises God even in the coldest season. Outside, the villagers continue their work. You pass a carpenter's shop where garlands are being twisted into circles for doorways. In the market, vendors sell sprigs of rosemary and laurel, claiming that the smoke of burning herbs will cleanse a house of envy and bad dreams. The mingled fragrances turn the square into an open-air chapel of scent. A traveller from Italy once described the smell of a northern village at Christmas as a forest walking, and you understand what he meant. In one corner of the square, an old man sits carving a wooden angel. His hands tremble slightly, but each stroke of the knife is sure. He explains that he makes one figure every year and leaves it at the church door after midnight mass. For the lost, he says simply, meaning those who died during the year. You notice that his carving carries a gentle smile, its wings unfurled as if ready to lift into the cold air. A fragment from a medieval poem celebrates this same season of greenery. Ivy and holly, king and queen midwinter, keep our hearts from breaking in the cold. You repeat the line softly to yourself as you walk, feeling its truth. The world outside is white and still, but every doorway now breathes with colour. As evening approaches, candles are placed in the windows beside the wreaths. Their flames turn the greenery into gold. Families gather around their tables, admiring the decorations and sharing simple food. You are invited into one house where the scent of pine fills the air. The mistress of the home explains that they keep a small sprig of holly over the cradle to protect the baby from the night breath, a phrase that once meant sickness. She pats the infant gently, humming a lullaby so soft it seems part of the candlelight itself. Scholars today suggest that this reverence for greenery reveals how closely medieval people lived with the natural world. They depended on it for survival, but also saw it as a reflection of divine mystery. In their eyes, a plant that stayed alive when everything else died was not just decoration. It was a lesson in endurance. The faith they built around it did not erase its older meaning. It deepened it. You step outside again as twilight deepens. The air smells of pine, wax, and snow. The entire village glows softly now, each house a small lantern against the dark. The church bell rings, and the sound mingles with the rustle of branches in the wind. You tilt your head back and see the faint outline of the moon caught between the roofs, framed by garlands that sway gently. For a moment, you imagine the scene repeated across centuries, countless hands gathering holly, countless voices humming the same simple songs, countless candles burning in the same kind of night. The thought fills you with a calm that feels older than words. The evergreen, sturdy and fragrant, has done its work once again. It has brought life back to winter. You breathe deeply, tasting the cold air and the scent of resin on your tongue. Behind you, laughter spills from a doorway, warm and golden. You walk on through the snow, surrounded by light and colour, feeling as if the world itself has taken a deep breath after holding it too long. The sun rises weakly over the rooftops, touching the frost with a pale shimmer. You hear the first bell of the day calling the faithful to Mass, but most of the village is already awake. Smoke curls from chimneys, and the smell of baking bread drifts through the lanes. Inside one cottage, you glimpse women kneading dough, their sleeves rolled to their elbows, their laughter echoing through the doorway. You pause to watch, realizing how much of this season belongs to their hands. According to many household records, women shaped much of medieval Christmas from the shadows. They prepared the food, gathered the greenery, made candles, and organized songs for the children. Queens in their courts and peasants in their cottages alike took charge of turning winter into celebration. You can almost hear their unseen orchestration in every sound of the village: the creak of a spinning wheel, the whisper of a broom sweeping the floor, the hiss of bread crusting in the oven. In the manor hall, preparations for another feast are underway. Servants bustle in the kitchen, guided by the lady of the house who oversees every detail. A clerk once wrote that the best noblewomen ruled their kitchens like abbesses, ruled their cloisters, mixing piety with practicality. You see her now, calm and commanding, tasting broth, adjusting the placement of tablecloths, scolding one servant gently for burning the honey cakes. Her touch keeps the entire household moving like a slow, graceful machine. One curious note from a French chronicle describes how noblewomen sometimes brewed special Christmas ale flavored with spices and herbs, said to guard against illness. Recipes varied, but almost all included a sprig of rosemary for remembrance and a dash of nutmeg for luck. You picture the lady of this manor stirring the pot with quiet satisfaction, knowing her brew will warm the hearts of guests and servants alike. Outside, the rhythm is gentler. In the fields, a group of women collects twigs for the hearths, their skirts brushing against the snow. They speak softly, their breath misting in the cold. One carries a small basket of dried herbs for the evening meal. Another hums a carol under her breath, her voice steady and low. A passing monk once recorded such singing as the truest form of prayer, music born not from choirs but from work itself. In the convent nearby, another kind of Christmas unfolds. Nuns gather in the chapel to sing hymns, their voices clear and calm. They decorate the altar with evergreen branches and a simple wooden star. Letters from medieval abbesses reveal how they balanced solemn devotion with small joys. On Christmas Day, they were allowed extra candles in the dormitory, and sometimes a sweet made with honey and almonds. One abbess wrote to her sister, "We feast upon light, not flesh," yet the joy in her words feels just as rich as any noble banquet. Back in the village, women of every rank share one burden that the season cannot erase: endless work. They cook, clean, mend, and serve from dawn until the stars return. Yet within the work there is rhythm and grace, a kind of unspoken power. A peasant woman you meet at the well tells you she has already baked 6 loaves of bread for the feast, brewed ale, and spun enough wool for 2 cloaks. She laughs at your astonishment. "The Lord's Day waits for no one," she says, dipping her bucket. Her breath rises like smoke. An old folk saying recorded in a rural parish book declares that a woman's hands build Christmas while men toast to it. The line is teasing but true. You see it in the way the village moves. Men carry wood, tend animals, and drink the ale that women brewed. But it is the women who ensure the house smells of herbs and bread, who lay the table, who make the holiday visible. A travelling friar once wrote about visiting a widow's cottage during Christmastide. She had little, just a loaf of bread, a cup of ale, and a single candle, but she insisted on sharing it with him. When he tried to refuse, she said, "It is not feast or famine that makes Christmas, but company." You think of her words now as the villagers gather in clusters, exchanging food, songs, and stories, many of them led by the quiet confidence of women. The afternoon light fades, and snow begins again, soft as flower dust. Inside the houses, women prepare for the evening's gatherings. You walk past a window and glimpse a girl braiding her mother's hair, laughing as they share a secret. Another house glows from within, a group of women mending clothes for the poor by candlelight. Their faces are serious, but their voices hum a soft tune that sounds older than the church bell. Historians today often speak of how women's labor shaped not only domestic life but culture itself. The songs they taught their children, the recipes they guarded, the rituals they performed at firesides, all these left traces stronger than any royal decree. Without them, the season would have been a shadow, prayer without comfort, ritual without warmth. As night falls, the last of the chores are finished. The fires burn low, and the sound of spinning wheels gives way to quiet conversation. The women sit for a moment of rest, their hands finally still. The oldest of them, her hair silver in the firelight, murmurs a prayer of thanks. Her words are simple, but they carry weight. Gratitude for warmth, for food, for each other. You step outside again, the snow glowing faintly in the moonlight. The village is silent except for the distant sound of someone singing a cradle song. The voice is soft, almost a whisper, but it carries across the fields. You listen until the last note fades, and in that silence, you understand that the real miracle of this season is not found in gold or grand feasts, but in the steady hands that make every hearth glow. The snow has stopped, leaving the world wrapped in a soft silence. You walk through the village and hear the sound laughter floating from every doorway. Inside the homes, fires burn bright, and the smell of sweet pastries and cider drifts into the cold air. It is the children's time now. Christmas, for them, is a season of wonder, of glowing candles and whispered secrets. According to writings from medieval teachers and clerics, children looked forward to Christmas with a mixture of awe and excitement. In a world that offered them little leisure, these days of rest felt like a dream. The fasts of Advent had ended, and sweets so rare the rest of the year suddenly appeared. Honey cakes, nuts, and dried fruits were shared freely. You see a group of children sitting near a hearth, sticky fingers clutching crumbs as they giggle at an older cousin telling a story about the Christ child visiting their village in disguise. The custom of gift-giving extended to the youngest as well. Historical household accounts list small presents, carved toys, bits of colored ribbon, or tiny figurines shaped from dough. A noble family might gift their children a book of psalms, its pages illuminated with gold leaf. For most, though, a gift as simple as an apple or a sweetened bun could spark pure joy. One chronicler from Norwich noted that no king ever smiled so wide as a child given a raisin on Christmas morning. You stop to watch a group of boys dragging a sled made from a broken barrel. Their laughter echoes off the frozen cottages. One falls, another pulls him up, both covered in snow but grinning. A girl joins them, tossing snow into the air like confetti. Their games leave tracks across the square, a map of joy etched into the white ground. Inside the church, the evening's miracle play is about to begin. The children crowd near the front, eyes shining as candles flicker along the stone walls. The story is familiar, the manger, the shepherds, the angels, but to them, it feels brand new each year. The youngest gasps when the angel appears in shining robes, and a little boy dressed as a lamb forgets his lines, prompting laughter that ripples through the pews. You can see why medieval priests tolerated this noise. It was proof that faith could be joyful. A curious note from a monastery school describes how, during the Christmas season, children were allowed to lead certain services in mock imitation of their elders. They appointed a boy bishop, who blessed the congregation and processed through the streets with laughter and song. Though the church later tried to suppress this custom, many towns continued it secretly. It was part of the same spirit that crowned the Lord of Misrule, a brief turning of the world upside down, laughter in place of solemnity. After the play, the crowd spills into the square. Someone brings out a wooden bowl filled with warm spiced milk, and the children take turns sipping. Steam curls in the air like invisible ribbons. The priest watches with amusement, and for once, No one scolds them for running or shouting. In these fleeting days, even mischief feels holy. You walk through the village and see more small miracles unfolding. A mother lifts her baby to look at the candles in the window. The child's eyes widen, reflecting the flames. Two brothers sit on a step, sharing a crust of bread and pretending it is a king's feast. Around them, adults pause in their work to watch, smiling quietly. A traveller's diary from the late Middle Ages mentions that Christmas reminded people to see the world as children did, full of marvels, fragile but beautiful. The child knows what the man forgets, the writer mused, that every light is a gift, and every laugh is salvation. You think of that now as the children's laughter mingles with the faint tolling of the church bell. As night deepens, the families return indoors. You are invited into one house, where four children sit by the hearth listening to their grandfather. His voice is slow and rhythmic as he tells a story of a star that sang. The children lean closer, their eyes reflecting the firelight. When the tale ends, they beg for another, and he chuckles before beginning again. The oldest girl falls asleep halfway through, her head on her sister's shoulder. Modern historians often remind us that childhood in the Middle Ages was brief and harsh. Many worked from a young age, and winters were cruel. Yet for a few days each year, they were allowed to be simply children, to sing, to play, to eat until they were full. You feel the importance of that mercy, small as it may seem. When the house quiets, the mother tucks each child into a straw bed near the fire. She murmurs a prayer that angels will guard them through the night. You step outside and see the glow of dozens of fires through the mist. Behind every one of those windows, other children are dreaming of stars, of saints, of warmth that never fades. You stand still for a moment, your breath hanging in the cold air. The world feels softer now, alive with innocence that even war and hunger could not erase. Somewhere, a single voice hums a lullaby, the same tune that has echoed through centuries. It drifts across the snow like a blessing, reminding you that joy, once shared, never truly disappears. Morning arrives wrapped in mist, soft and still. The snow crunches under your boots as you walk toward the square. A faint smell of baking bread and boiled ale drifts through the air, mingled with smoke from the hearths. The church bell rings once, then again, marking another day of Christmastide. It is a day for both generosity and trade, for giving and receiving, for testing the delicate balance between charity and commerce that defines the season. According to surviving guild records, merchants often made their greatest profits in the days following Christmas. Markets reopened with stalls full of spices, fabrics, and trinkets meant for the feasts that continued until Twelfth Night. You see them now, traders in heavy cloaks, their carts piled with goods, their breath visible in the morning chill. They shout their wares in voices hoarse from the cold. Warm gloves, fresh bread, candles and ribbons for your tables. The noise fills the square, a hum of survival disguised as cheer. At the same time, the church doors stand open for almsgiving. The poor gather patiently, some carrying baskets, others holding their children by the hand. A clerk stands beside the door with a ledger, taking note of donations. You watch as a woman from the manor house arrives, her servant carrying a basket of food wrapped in linen. She kneels to speak softly with an old man waiting in line and presses a loaf into his hands. The act feels genuine, the gesture of someone who remembers that kindness is a kind of power. A letter written by a monk in the 14th century mentions that giving to the poor at Christmastide was considered more than duty, it was purification. For what joy is kept and not shared, he wrote, soon rots in the keeping. His words seem to echo in the sound of coins dropping into bowls, in the murmured blessings that pass between giver and receiver. Not all generosity comes easily. Near one stall, a merchant argues with a beggar over a measure of grain. The merchant insists he cannot give away what he must sell. The beggar replies that God rewards mercy more than profit. Their voices rise until a passing priest steps in, offering to pay for the grain himself. Both men fall silent, and the merchant, shamed, adds a handful extra to the bag. The priest smiles faintly and walks away without another word. A curious account from a chronicler in London describes a strange tradition that blurred the line between charity and theatre. Wealthy merchants would stage public feasts for the poor, laying long tables in the streets and serving food to all who came. Some did it for genuine compassion. Others, the chronicler hints, for reputation. Yet even if pride was the motive, hunger was still eased. The chronicler's tone softens when he writes, "Better a proud hand that feeds than a humble one that turns away." As noon approaches, the market grows louder. Children chase each other through the stalls, dogs sniff at crumbs, and musicians play a tune to draw attention to their baskets. The rhythm is lively but rough, the kind that loosens even tired faces. You buy a cup of hot cider from a woman who ladles it from a steaming pot. She tells you that all profits from her sales today will go to the parish's poor box. Her eyes twinkle as she adds, "It helps that generosity tastes better with spice." In the corner of the square, a group of apprentices has set up a small puppet show. Their makeshift stage is built from a cart draped in cloth, and the figures are carved from wood and painted bright colours. The story they tell is part sacred, part comic. A miserly baker who refuses to feed the hungry until an angel tricks him into giving his bread away. The crowd roars with laughter when the puppet angel chases the baker around with a wooden spoon. The performance ends with cheers and a round of coins tossed into the apprentice's box. Even in jest, the message is clear: sharing makes the season holy. As the afternoon fades, the merchants begin to pack their goods, but the spirit of giving lingers. You follow a group of townsfolk carrying baskets of leftovers to the edge of the village, where the poorest live in huts near the river. They knock gently on each door, leaving bread, cheese, and bits of meat. The recipients smile shyly, whispering thanks. One woman, wrapped in a patched cloak, presses a dried apple into your hand in return. "For luck," she says simply. Modern historians often note that medieval charity was both deeply spiritual and quietly practical. Giving food or alms was an act of salvation for the giver as much as the receiver. People believed that generosity could shorten their time in purgatory. Yet beyond the theology, there was something more immediate, the knowledge that someday the giver might be the one in need. Night falls early, and the market square empties. The snow glows faintly in the light of scattered lanterns. You pass the church again, where a few figures remain kneeling in prayer. Their murmurs rise like a soft tide. In the distance, you hear singing low, slow, and beautiful. It is the hymn of the season, its refrain simple: "What is given in love is never lost." You pause to listen, feeling the meaning sink into you. In the cold of winter, the act of giving is more than kindness. It is survival, community, and faith entwined. The villagers understand this instinctively. Every loaf shared, every coin dropped into a hand, every smile offered across the cold becomes a promise that no one is forgotten. As you walk away, the snow begins to fall again, thick and quiet. The last candle in the market flickers, then steadies. You pull your cloak close and glance once more at the church door, still open, still glowing with warmth. The world outside may be frozen, but inside, hearts are still moving, still generous, still alive. By the 12th day of Christmas, the frost no longer feels cruel but familiar, part of the rhythm of life. You walk through the village and hear laughter coming from every doorway. The feasts continue, the songs change, and the people seem both weary and joyful, caught between celebration and the turning of the year. This morning, however, you notice something new: travelers on the road who speak different languages, their clothes cut in unfamiliar styles. You realize that Christmas in the Middle Ages was not one story but many, woven across all of Christendom. Contemporary accounts reveal that while the meaning of the season remained the same everywhere, the birth of hope, the triumph of light, its expression varied from land to land. In England, villagers filled their homes with holly and ale, while in France, nobles set tables laden with goose and gilded pastries. In the Italian cities, children carried small cradles with carved figures of the Christ child, and in the colder reaches of the Holy Roman Empire, people built great fires in the squares, feeding them with branches of fir to warm the towns through the long night. You begin your journey southward in your imagination, crossing the Alps where snow piles thick and the sound of church bells echoes through the valleys. In a small Italian village, you picture friars assembling a nativity scene for the first time. Chroniclers credit St. Francis of Assisi with creating it in the 13th century. He wanted people to see the story of the manger, not merely hear it. The villagers brought real animals into a cave, lit candles, and sang hymns until dawn. You can almost hear their voices, soft and reverent, rising with the scent of hay and wax. Farther east, in the bustling cities of the Holy Roman Empire, the holiday takes a grander shape. Guilds sponsor pageants, and apprentices parade with torches through narrow streets. A record from Nuremberg describes how bakers gifted bread to orphans, while the goldsmiths offered coins for the church's repairs. The sound of trumpets echoed through the squares as the magistrates processed in velvet robes. Yet even here, amid wealth and ceremony, the heart of the season remains the same, a feast for the humble as much as the mighty. In France, the celebrations tilt toward elegance. Chroniclers write of tables stretching the length of halls, covered with roasted peacocks and fine wines. Candles flicker in polished goblets, and troubadours sing verses that blend praise for God with compliments for their patrons. A noblewoman might toss coins to musicians, while peasants outside the gates sing their own songs, more rustic but no less full of joy. One observer from Paris wrote that every street, rich or poor, shines alike with song. In the far north, the tone changes again. There, among snow-covered forests and long nights, the people's Christianity still carries a trace of older magic. They light fires to banish the dark, hang charms of straw shaped like suns, and tell stories of spirits who guard the home until dawn. A visiting monk once complained that these customs smelled too much of pagan memory, but even he admitted that they gave the people comfort. Modern historians still debate whether these practices were remnants of older solstice worship or simply the natural way human beings keep faith with the seasons. You imagine crossing eastward toward the great cities of Byzantium, where Christmas takes on a tone of shimmering ritual. The Hagia Sophia glows with thousands of lamps reflected in golden mosaics. The congregation listens as choirs sing in voices so pure they seem unearthly. A Byzantine poet wrote that the light of the candles moved like angels on the walls. It is a far cry from the rough joy of the northern fairs, yet the intent is the same, to celebrate the moment when divinity entered the human world. Across these lands, the food, the music, the prayers differ, but the rhythm is shared. Each community, in its own way, builds warmth against the cold, some through splendor, some through simplicity. A merchant in Venice gives coins to a sailor's widow. A peasant in Bohemia saves a crust of bread for a neighbor's child. A monk in Norway lights a single candle and whispers a psalm. Together, these acts form the tapestry of a continent's devotion. An English traveller's diary from the late 14th century describes his astonishment at finding himself in a German village on Christmas Eve. Though he did not understand the language, he wrote that he felt at home by the sound of their song. The words may have been foreign, but the rhythm, the cadence of joy and gratitude was the same. You think of that as you listen to the hum of voices around you, 1,000 tongues telling one story. By nightfall, you return to your imagined village. The bells are ringing again, calling everyone to Mass. Inside the church, the decorations look familiar. Greenery on the altar, candles in every niche, the air heavy with incense. Yet you sense the presence of distant lands within this space. The melodies from Italy, the solemnity from Byzantium, the firelight from the north all seem to meet here in the glow of a single flame. You stand among the villagers as the priest lifts his hands in blessing. His words are spoken in Latin, but their meaning transcends any tongue. Peace, renewal, light. You realize that while history remembers kings and wars, it is these moments, shared songs, shared prayers, shared meals that truly bound people together across continents and centuries. When the service ends, you step outside. The snow reflects the candlelight spilling from the church windows, and the stars glitter above like scattered embers. You look toward the horizon and imagine all the other fires burning tonight, in other countries, under other skies. The same warmth, the same hope, the same defiance of winter. It is, and always has been, the quiet unity of the human heart. The air feels heavier tonight, as if the darkness itself holds memory. You walk through the quiet fields, snow crunching softly beneath your boots. Far off, a line of torches glows along the ridge where the villagers have gathered. It is the season's deepest night, the old heart of winter, when the celebration edges closest to its ancient roots. According to early chronicles, long before the birth of Christianity, people marked this time with fires and feasts to welcome the sun's slow return. The Romans called it Saturnalia, the Norse honoured Yule, and across many lands the same instinct endured, to greet the longest night with laughter, to promise that light would rise again. The new faith did not erase these customs, it reshaped them. The same fires that once called the sun now celebrated the sun. And the same evergreen branches once tied to gods of harvest now adorned churches in praise of everlasting life. You reach the hilltop where the villagers are preparing the bonfire. Piles of oak logs and dried brush rise taller than a man. The people stand close together, their breath visible in the cold. A priest blesses the fire with holy water, and an old woman mutters a second charm under her breath for good measure. No one minds. This night belongs to all prayers, spoken and unspoken alike. When the torch touches the wood, the blaze roars to life. The flames climb high, their light reflecting off snow until the night turns gold. The heat washes over you, carrying the smell of pitch and pine resin. Sparks rise into the air like stars, vanishing as quickly as they are born. Around the fire, people begin to sing slow at first, then louder, voices blending into a single rhythm older than memory. A curious note in a 12th century sermon complains that villagers still honoured sunrise feasts at Christmastide, greeting the dawn with dancing instead of prayer. Yet even that priest admitted that joy itself was a form of devotion. Scholars today continue to discuss whether the church adopted the midwinter festival deliberately or simply found itself swept into a tide of human celebration too deep to stop. Whatever the truth, the result was harmony rather than conquest. Old customs reborn inside new meaning. A man standing beside you tells a story his grandfather once told him. Long ago, he says, people believed that if the fire burned until dawn without dying, the year ahead would bring peace. If it flickered out, storms would come. As he speaks, the flames shift, sending a burst of light into the dark sky. He smiles, content with the omen. Nearby, children toss handfuls of herbs into the fire, watching them crackle and spark green and blue. Their laughter carries through the smoke. The old woman from earlier gives each child a small coin for luck, muttering that the spirits of the earth must be fed as well as the body. A few parents cross themselves, half out of piety, half out of habit. Faith and folklore dance together here without contradiction. In the glow of the flames, you notice a musician tuning his fiddle. He begins to play a tune that drifts somewhere between hymn and harvest song. Couples join hands, circling the fire, their feet stamping patterns into the snow. A little girl trips, and her mother catches her mid-spin, laughing. For a moment, the rhythm erases every burden of the year. Taxes, hunger, toil, loss. Only the music remains, wild and bright. An old Latin carol survives that captures the spirit of this night. The sun and the child are born together, and the world begins again. You whisper the words to yourself, feeling their truth more than understanding them. Around you the light grows stronger. Even the stars seem to fade in the face of such brilliance. As the fire burns lower, the villagers sit in small groups sharing food from baskets: bread, cheese, roasted apples, and flasks of ale. They pass the food around freely, feeding strangers as readily as kin. One man tears his loaf in half and offers it to you with a nod. The gesture is simple, but carries the weight of centuries. To share food beside a fire in the heart of winter is to declare allegiance not to tribe or faith, but to life itself. A passing friar once described witnessing such a scene with wonder. He wrote that men worshipped without knowing, and God smiled upon them anyway. His words linger in your mind as you watch the flames dance lower and lower, until only embers remain. Finally, the priest steps forward again. He lifts his hands and offers a prayer for the coming year, for peace, for health, for mercy. When he finishes, silence settles. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of smoke away. The villagers rise, brushing snow from their cloaks, and begin the slow walk home. The old woman stays behind a moment, poking at the coals with her staff. When she sees you watching, she smiles. "The fire always returns," she says softly. "It only sleeps." You turn toward the village, the snow gleaming faintly beneath the stars. Behind you, the embers glow like a heartbeat in the darkness. You think about how traditions survive, not through rules, but through memory, through the warmth of gatherings like this, through stories told beside the flames, through a human need as ancient as hunger. As you walk, the eastern sky begins to pale. The first light of dawn spills over the fields, faint but certain. The sun has returned, and with it, the promise of another year. The year is turning again, and you can feel it in the air. The snow lies deep in the ditches, the sky a sheet of dull silver, but the bells still ring. Their sound rolls across the empty fields like breath itself, calling people to gather one more time before the season ends. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the sound toward the village. According to the chronicles that survived the worst centuries, Christmas never truly vanished, even when the world seemed to collapse around it. The 14th century brought famine, the 15th brought war, and the plague walked beside both. Yet in every year, people still found ways to light candles, to sing, to share food. You imagine the scene in those harder winters: thin faces, trembling hands, yet still the same hope flickering behind every pair of eyes. A chronicle from York describes a Christmas during the Great Famine, when there was no wheat, no meat, and almost no ale. The townsfolk gathered anyway, boiling what they could find into a thin soup of barley and herbs. They prayed for the dead and blessed the living. One monk wrote that their songs were softer, but the angels surely heard them louder. You think of that line as you walk into the square where the people once again stand together despite the cold. The church door stands open. Inside, candles burn in memory of those lost to sickness and hunger. You see a woman kneeling near the altar, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles gleam white. Beside her sits a small loaf of bread, the kind that would feed a family for a day. She leaves it as an offering, a gesture of gratitude for survival. The air smells faintly of wax, smoke, and damp stone. Outside, the rest of the village has begun a quiet procession. They carry candles and sprigs of evergreen, walking slowly through snow. The priest leads them in prayer, his voice steady, though the words tremble in the wind. Children walk beside their parents, their faces solemn. A few men carry torches that sputter in the breeze. The light moves through the dark like a river, soft but unbroken. In a diary written by a soldier returning from war, there is a note about such a procession. He wrote that after years of blood and loss, he walked behind the candles and wept, not for sorrow but for peace. For the first time in many winters, he said, the world felt alive again. You can feel the same fragile peace now, the hush that follows grief but does not erase it. A child stumbles in the snow, and her mother lifts her, brushing ice from her cheeks. The girl looks up at her candle, fascinated by the flame. Her mother smiles and steadies her hand. You realize that this, more than any sermon, is the meaning of endurance, one generation teaching the next to carry the light. The plague once emptied whole villages, and yet some churches reported that Christmas services drew even larger crowds afterward. Historians think that people sought meaning in the face of despair, that ritual helped them make sense of loss. Others believe that faith itself grew stronger in disaster, that hope fed on its own defiance. Watching the procession, you see both explanations in motion. Fear and faith walk side by side, bound together by need. Later, the people gather inside their homes. The feasts are smaller now, but the laughter sounds the same. A woman stirs a pot of stew, while her husband mends a cracked window. The children play with wooden toys passed down through generations. A neighbor arrives with a loaf of bread, and another follows with a small jug of wine. In times like these, hospitality becomes holy. One traveler's letter from the late Middle Ages tells of how, even during war, soldiers on opposing sides agreed to cease fighting for a single night. They shared food, traded songs, and built a fire together. No one spoke of kings or battles, the writer recalled, only of warmth and of God. You think of that story as you see villagers offering each other food at their doors, no one turning anyone away. As the night deepens, the snow begins again, soft and steady. The air grows thick with quiet, and the sound of bells returns. Their tones are low, almost mournful, yet not hopeless. Each ring feels like a heartbeat, steadying the rhythm of the dark world. Inside the church, the last candles burn low. The woman who prayed earlier has returned to her knees. She leans forward, whispering words too soft to hear, and then rises, leaving the last flame to flicker alone. You watch it bend and straighten in the draught, a single point of defiance against the cold. Scholars today still discuss whether faith or habit sustained people through those terrible winters. Some say it was ritual, the comfort of repetition. Others argue it was simple courage, the refusal to surrender to despair. Perhaps it was both. What you see tonight is proof enough. A community scarred by hunger and sickness, but still singing, still lighting candles, still believing that dawn will come. You step outside again. The wind has gentled, and the snow glows faintly under the moon. Across the village, fires burn behind frosted windows. Every home, no matter how poor, sends a thin column of smoke curling into the air. You look up at the sky and imagine the same sight mirrored across all the land. Thousands of tiny lights burning in defiance of cold, darkness, and death. The bells fall silent at last. In that stillness, you hear another kind of sound, the quiet pulse of life persisting, the faint breath of the world itself refusing to end. The thought warms you more deeply than the fire ever could. Morning breaks softly over the snow, the sky, the pale color of milk. You can feel a shift in the air, a quiet change that belongs not to weather but to time. The 12 days are nearly over, and with them, the old year finally gives way to the new. As you walk through the village, you sense the subtle weariness behind the smiles. The candles have burned low, the feasts have dwindled, and even the songs sound slower now. Yet there is peace in that quiet, the kind that follows joy rather than precedes it. According to early parish registers, the final days of Christmas in late medieval Europe were both celebration and reflection. People took stock of what they had, repaired tools and clothing, counted the remaining grain, and whispered prayers of thanks. You see it in the small things around you. A farmer sharpening his plough, a woman sweeping away pine needles, children helping their mother untangle the last of the garlands. The holiday is ending, but life goes on, steady as the turning of the earth. Inside the church, the priest is preparing for the feast of the Epiphany, the day that marks the visit of the Magi. He polishes the chalice until it gleams and arranges 3 candles on the altar, one for each of the kings who followed the star. The smell of incense lingers, sweet and heavy. You sit in the back pew and watch the light filter through coloured glass, turning the stone floor to patches of ruby and sapphire. A record from a monastery in Burgundy describes how the Epiphany was both an ending and a beginning. The brothers feasted one final time, then returned to their vows of silence. The abbot wrote, "We close the feast with gratitude, for joy cannot live without rest." His words seem to echo now in the hush that fills the church. The villagers enter quietly, carrying small gifts to bless for the year ahead: salt for preservation, bread for nourishment, and candles for protection. Outside, the market is smaller than before, but still alive. A few merchants pack their stalls, while others sell the last of their winter stock. You stop to watch a woman selling wax tapers, each one stamped with a small star. "For travel and childbirth," she says. "For luck on the road." You buy one and slip it into your pocket, feeling its cool weight against your palm. A curious tradition mentioned in a 15th century diary describes how households marked this day by drawing chalk crosses above their doors. The gesture was meant to invite blessing for the coming year and to keep away misfortune. You pass several houses where families are doing just that. The children giggle as they try to copy their parents' movements, leaving lopsided marks that make everyone laugh. Faith here feels gentle, woven into daily life like breath into a sigh. At the manor, the mood is more restrained than before. The Lord hosts one last dinner for his household, but the excess of the earlier feasts has softened into simplicity. Platters of roast meat give way to vegetable stews, and the conversation turns from music to plans for spring planting. The lady of the house raises a cup and thanks her servants for their loyalty. One of them replies with a toast of his own, awkward but sincere. For a moment, the usual barriers of class vanish, replaced by something like kinship. Historians have written that this period marked the slow transition between two worlds, the fading Middle Ages and the dawn of new thought. The printing press was beginning to spread across Europe, carrying ideas that would one day change faith itself. Yet even amid such transformation, people clung to their rituals. Carols still echoed in stone churches, fires still burned against the cold, and candles still shone in cottage windows. Tradition, like the evergreen, endured through every season of change. You walk through the village as twilight falls. The sky deepens to violet, and smoke rises from the chimneys once more. In the square, a small group of singers gathers for the final carol of the season. Their voices blend softly, the melody winding through the air like mist. The song tells of the Magi's journey, of faith found not in palaces but on a road beneath the stars. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the music settle deep in your chest. A traveller's account from the late 15th century mentions how, after the carols ended, people often shared predictions for the year ahead. Some read them in the ashes of the Yule fire, others in the patterns of melted wax. You watch now as an old woman tilts a candle over a bowl of water, letting the wax fall in drops. The shapes ripple and twist in the dim light. "A good year," she says quietly. "The earth is listening." When the song ends, silence drapes over the village like snow. One by one, the singers drift home, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness. The church bell tolls a final time for the season, slow and full. You stand alone in the square, watching the last candle flicker in the window of the tavern. The smell of smoke and pine hangs faintly in the air. Some scholars suggest that by the end of the 15th century, Christmas had already begun to change. Reformation and reform were coming, new ideas questioning old ceremonies. Yet none of that can touch this moment. The people you've walked among, monks, peasants, nobles, mothers, children, would not live to see the transformations ahead. What they knew was the rhythm of their days: fasting, feasting, praying, and laughing. They built meaning from small acts of kindness, and in that, they found eternity. You take a deep breath and look up. The stars above are bright, unblinking, ancient. Somewhere far away, the fires of other villages still burn. You imagine them like constellations scattered across the dark fields of the world, each one carrying the same promise that began in a manger centuries before. The night is still, the air sharp, and for the first time in weeks, the land feels content. The 12th night arrives quietly, wrapped in stillness. The snow outside lies untouched, and the moonlight falls across the rooftops in a pale shimmer. Inside the cottages, fires burn low, their light softening the wooden beams and the tired faces gathered beneath them. It is the end of the feast, the closing breath of Christmas. You can feel the season drawing to a gentle close, like a song fading into silence. According to the old calendars, this final evening belonged to reflection and renewal. People put away their decorations, burned the last of the Yule logs, and offered prayers for the months ahead. The next morning would bring work again, fields to tend, animals to feed, debts to pay, but tonight was for gratitude. The villagers sit together, quiet but content, telling stories one last time before sleep takes them. At the manor, the great hall is dimmer now. The garlands have dried, the platters are empty, and only a few candles still flicker beside the hearth. The lord and lady sit among their guests, not as hosts but as companions, sharing the final cup of ale. A musician plays softly, his tune slow and wistful. It is not a song of joy, but of peace. You can almost feel the warmth of the moment, a kind of acceptance, as though the world itself exhales. A note from a 15th century household account describes how families saved a fragment of bread from the Christmas table to bury in the spring planting, a symbol of continuity. What is sown in feast will rise in labour, the writer observed. You watch as the lady of the house quietly wraps a crust of bread in linen and sets it beside the window. It is a small act, but it carries meaning. The feast becomes seed, and the joy of the season will one day return as harvest. Outside, the villagers gather once more in the square for the blessing of the year's end. The priest holds a single candle aloft, its flame trembling in the wind. He speaks of the Magi, of journeys and gifts, of light that never fails. The people bow their heads, murmuring their own prayers. Then he lowers the flame to a bowl of water, hissing as it meets the surface. The smoke curls upward, a final offering to heaven. A chronicler from an abbey in Kent once wrote that silence is also praise. As the villagers disperse, you sense that truth here. There are no grand speeches, no loud farewells, only the crunch of snow underfoot and the faint creak of doors closing for the night. Each family retreats into its home, leaving the square empty but for the footprints that mark their passing. Inside one small cottage, the family you met before sits by the fire. The children have fallen asleep. The father nods in his chair, and the mother hums softly while mending a torn sleeve. The sound is barely more than a whisper, yet it fills the room like a blessing. When she finishes, she folds her work neatly, looks into the fire, and smiles. The logs crack, sending sparks into the chimney. Outside, the snow drifts down again, thick and unhurried. Modern historians like to mark this period as the turning point between the old world and the new. Printing presses are spreading, cities are growing, thought itself is beginning to change. Yet none of that touches the people you see tonight. For them, time moves in circles, not lines. Winter will fade, spring will come, and when the frost returns again, so will the candles, the songs, the laughter. The same patterns will repeat, each year a little different, each year the same. You step out into the cold one last time. The village lies quiet beneath the stars, each house a small point of light. The snow glows faintly, almost silver. You walk to the edge of the square and look back. The church stands dark now. The fires inside the cottages dim, yet nothing feels lost. The season's warmth lingers, invisible but sure. And so the story draws to rest. You take a deep breath, the air sharp and clean, and let it fill your lungs. You think of all the people who lived these days centuries ago, their laughter, their songs, their prayers, and how their voices still echo, faint but steady, through the long corridors of time. The Middle Ages may have ended, but their